Well, good morning, friends. I want to extend a warm welcome to you today. Everyone is welcome here. You're welcome here regardless of your age, your race, your income, your religion, or the gender with which you identify. You are welcome here regardless of who you love, who you vote for, the regrets that burden you, or the mistakes you have made. In this safe community, we support each other in the sacred task of becoming, celebrate the transcending mystery of life, and rely on the transforming power of love. Here, we revere the words of the great teachers such as Jesus, the Buddha, and Confucius. It is, however, the job or the task of every UU to be their own Buddha or their own Jesus. It is a cornerstone of our religion that each of us is the author of their own life experience. And through the practice of compassionate mind, we can heal our bodies, our minds, our spirits, and our planet. It is our work as a community to walk with each other along the spiritual pathways that lead towards happiness, compassion, and life fully lived. And while we are a safe harbor where there is solace and healing, we are also a launching pad from which we are propelled into the tumult of life to live courageously, justly, and lovingly. In this sacred place, we create the structures that lift up the downtrodden, set the captives free, and heal the brokenhearted. We have learned that to be fully human is to be fully divine, and that with a little help from our friends, we can each tell our own unique story. So today is a day I've been looking forward to for quite a while. Brandon is going to talk a little bit about his life experience. And the theme of today is growth and transformation. Judy is going to talk a little bit about her work, helping people in their transformations. Judy is going to talk to us a little bit about Ramadan, and we have some gorgeous music coming our way, including Rich, who's going to do a solo with that. Are you going to do a solo? So, okay, so that's pretty exciting stuff. Also, by way of good news, my kids have been telling their parents how they really want to come to church today because they really like the owl training. So I think they're striking a chord. They are now getting to spend every Saturday night at our house, and then we just drive to church on Sunday morning. I must say, it still stymies me or amazes me how much energy kids that age have, but yet they don't have the strength to lift up the toilet lid. So I don't know what's going on there.
As you know, Islam is one of the world's great religions. I usually don't think much about Ramadan, although I have, at least one Palestinian refugee in my family. But with the tragic situations in the Middle East and Sudan, I wanted to speak about it. This year it begins tomorrow. Ramadan is the 9th month of the Islamic calendar observed by Muslims worldwide as a month of fasting, prayer, reflection, and community. It's a commemoration of Muhammad's first revelation. The annual observance of Ramadan is regarded as one of the 5 pillars of Islam. The spiritual rewards of fasting are believed to be multiplied during Ramadan. Then, during the hours of fasting, Muslims refrain not only from food and drink, but also tobacco products, sexual relations, and sinful behavior, devoting themselves instead to prayer and study of the Quran. Those who are ill, nursing mothers, and some others are not required to fast, but they are required to do so at another time. Muslims believe that Ramadan teaches them to practice self-discipline, self-control, sacrifice, and empathy for those who are less fortunate, thus encouraging actions of generosity and compulsory charity. They believe that fasting helps instill compassion for the food insecure poor. Each day before dawn, they observe a pre-fast meal. After stopping a short time before dawn, they begin the prayer of the day. At sunset, families break the fast, opening the meal by eating dates to commemorate Muhammad's practice of breaking the fast with 3 dates. They then adjourn for the 4th of the 5 required daily prayers, after which the main meal is served. Muslims are encouraged to read the entire Quran, which comprises 30 sections over the 30 days of Ramadan. that's a bit about Ramadan. I have some dates here, but you don't need to fast before eating these. On an ecumenical note, the package says that they're kosher for Passover.
Today's Chalice lighting words are by Beth Winecki. May this flame, symbol of transformation since time began, fire our curiosity, strengthen our wills, and sustain our courage as we seek what is good within and around us.
We have two speakers coming to us today, Judy Peele, who is a psychotherapist and has been part of the transformation of many people, I'm sure, and Brandon Flowers, Brandon, what is your official title over at the high school? School counselor. So you are in the thick of it.
Yes.
Yeah, you are in the trenches. So we're going to hear from Brandon, and with a very provocative title. If it's not hard, you're probably not doing it right. And Judy, if you would start, and then Brandon, if you just come right up and after her, that would be perfect.
When Jim asked me to give some brief remarks about the nature of my work as a therapist, I was happy to do it. I currently work 3 days a week at Van Buren Community Mental Health as an outreach therapist for older adults, meaning most of my clients are over 60 or medically frail or housebound or having extreme difficulty physically getting to our clinic in South Haven, so I go to see them in their homes. Two people have had a big influence on my career as a therapist. When I was just starting out as a student intern at Child and Family Services in Muskegon, I became panicked the day I was to have my first therapy client. I went to my supervisor, a wonderful, kind, and gentle man named Edgar Donatelli, bless his heart, and said, "Edgar, what do I do? What if I say the wrong thing?" Edgar said to me, "Judy, most of our clients have never had anyone listen to them for 45 minutes. If you can do that, you'll do fine." The other person who has influenced me is my current boss, Carol, who has greatly influenced how I practice with older adults that I see. She said that she loves working with older adults because they've made it this far. Something has helped them to overcome obstacles up till now. And she thinks her job is to help them find these qualities and apply them to their present problems, which I think is a good way to approach it. Many of the older adults I see are lonely, socially isolated, live in rural areas, and feel they are on the last leg of their journey through life with little to look forward to. There are several areas I tend to focus on in working with these folks. Hope. Your life is not over yet. As long as you breathe, you have room to grow. You are not standing still. There is a river flowing in your soul. Joy. What brings a bounce to your step and a smile to your face? What can you do today, tomorrow, next week to build these things back into your life? Gratitude. You have probably had many losses in recent years. Loss of friends and family, loss of good health, sometimes loss of job and material status, sometimes loss of a dear pet or a special place you love to live in or to visit, loss of power and control. But if you only concentrate on your losses, you will miss the magic that is still around you. Every day, write down 3 things you are grateful for. It can be something as simple as the sight of my neighbor's crocuses, or my kitchen faucet quit dripping, or the sun came out for 10 minutes today. Along with these, I have some hard lessons to review. Change is inevitable. Suffering is optional. You can't always control what happens in your life, but you can choose how to handle it. Happiness is a choice. Only one person is responsible to make that choice, and that person is you. And this sometimes is a hard lesson for some of my clients. Blaming others for your problems is a sure way to give away your power. Every day is a gift. Accepting responsibility for the wise use of that gift is the best way to reclaim your power so that you can shape your life into what you want. And if the client is still willing to see me again, I have some good news to impart. You are a work in progress. Every day gives you another chance to work towards becoming the person you want to be, even if it's just a little bit. Can you be 5% kinder, 10% a better listener, 12% more willing to do your dishes every day so the kitchen is not a depressing disaster? Use what you know and make it your business to find out what you don't know. What worked for you in the past? How can you tweak that response to help yourself in the present situation? Don't try to go it alone. Be willing to ask for the help and assistance you need. Is it time to set down that 50-pound suitcase of grievances, anger, resentment, and hatred you may have been carrying around for a very long time? If and when you choose to forgive, do it for yourself, not for the other person. You may be astonished to see how much easier your journey becomes without that suitcase. Set goals, even if they are little ones. If you're trying to lose weight, don't worry about the scale. Commit to making 1 or 2 or 3 healthy choices a day. And little by little, you'll get where you want to be. If your house is a mess and you don't know where to start, make your bed every day for a month. Celebrate your successes. Tell others of the positive changes you're making. Share the joy. Schedule pleasant activities that you enjoy every single day. Don't just wait for happiness to happen. Give it a nudge in the right direction. More than anything, I try to help my clients value themselves, their choices, their rights, their uniqueness, their experiences, and their wisdom. If they can do even a fraction of that, they will find themselves feeling much better.
So the shirt I chose today, as you can see, I've had it for a very long time, but this is the Dream Academy Toros basketball team shirt. The school is no longer in existence, so this may be, the only evidence that you see in your life. But I would like to tell the story of how working at Dream Academy transformed me. The one and only time I've been punched in the face was an errant left cross to my right jaw. Like a misaddressed piece of mail, I received this little affectation when it was actually intended for someone else. Who was it meant for, you might be asking? It was the other young man that I and my associate, our much beloved history teacher, were attempting to hold back. Human beings, like many of our animal cousins, have the amazing ability to switch modes of physiological operation when faced with threats that allow them to act quickly, with enhanced strength, all while dulling sensations of pain. This both helped, as the balled-up fist I caught with my cheek didn't really register with me until later, and hindered, as the 2 16-year-old boys were immensely difficult to separate, even for grown adults. You might say that was a minor miracle, only being hit once in 5 years as a teacher at Dream Academy High School. just back from Wolf's Marine on 9th Street in Benton Harbor, Michigan. The school was billed as a charter public high school in Benton Harbor that provided Benton Harbor students with a rigorous college prep curriculum in a smaller setting. But in a reckless, haphazard opening in which enrolling anyone and everyone that came to call, it quickly morphed into an open access alternative high school where aged out and or expelled Benton Harbor high schools and then later Countryside Academy students roamed the halls, bringing their preferred way of life with them. The rooms and halls of Dream Academy were not like a typical high school. It was a converted fruit cannery. The school was a box with one interior square hallway that separated the interior rooms from those along the outer wall. Windows came at a premium. In fact, only the Spanish and computer classrooms had them. There was no library, no real kitchen, and not a single locker to be found. It was more like the idea of a school than a school in the traditional sense. I still remember my first day there as a 10th and 12th grade high school English teacher back in 2011. I was terrified, and I'm sure my students could tell. And not just because this was my first teaching gig. I knew I was out of my depth personally, professionally, and culturally. I had only entered the teaching profession as a last resort to finally start making some money that would justify my English education. I really wanted to write novels. In fact, I tried to quit my teaching internship about 2/3 of the way through. It was only the tears of my site supervisor that made me finish. I did not know this at the time, but she was pregnant and had brought on an intern to take her place the following year during her maternity leave. Leaving would have crushed her plans. But I was the intern she got, definitely not the one she wanted. But I eventually graduated and found myself at the Dream. The stories I was told about my predecessor gave me little comfort. Apparently, he had endured 2 very long years of challenging behaviors. Students would run up and turn off the lights to the classroom, shrouding the room in darkness. Again, no windows. Then they would run up and punch him and or throw books at him. On another occasion, he had left the room to find that his desk and papers were covered in hand sanitizer. I imagine that when he stood up in front of his students each day, he felt a sense of antagonism, akin to standing on the 38th parallel in Korea. But there was another reason for my fear that fall in 2011. For the first 20 years of my life growing up in Stevensville, Michigan, there was one well-believed bit of folk wisdom that we teens passed along to each other and that never seemed to be challenged by the adults in our lives, save one high school social studies teacher. Whatever you do, stay on this side of the St. Joseph Bridge, or you will be jumped and quite possibly murdered. I don't ever remember being taught this explicitly by anyone, and I certainly didn't have any firsthand experience to draw from, but the message was definitely received, well enough even to have a map formed in my head. There was a good Benton Harbor that included the Pipestone Road and Napier Avenue commercial areas and the agricultural areas of Benton Heights, as well as the whirlpool-influenced northern Benton Harbor, which could be reached across the other bridge from St. Joseph. This blanket of white grace would later be granted to Fairplain in the Arts District. But where I was standing, that was just inside the door of the danger zone. And more importantly, these kids came from the parts of Benton Harbor that I had learned to instinctively fear. They were loud, playful to the extreme, energetic, disrespectful, insubordinate, and loved fighting and talking about fighting. They moved about the building seemingly at will, with a few that seemed to show little understanding that they were following a schedule at all. I was given a roster from my classes, which was apparently a recent level of organization for the Dream. On these class rosters were 30 to 35 student names that seemed to have very little to do with who was actually in my room at any given time. When I called roll for the first time, I found more than half of the students were absent, a trend that would continue throughout the school's existence. Some of them I would meet throughout the year, while many others never showed up once. By the end of the first day, I was ready to walk, and it didn't improve through the end of the first week or month. Teaching was impossible. These students were used to worksheets, crosswords, word searches, and the like. We had a classroom set of textbooks, but they were in bad shape and locked away in the closet. These students had not been invited to learn in a long time, and it showed. My lessons were constantly interrupted by bouts of blazing, a game in which back and forth insults were traded with the students around the players, indirectly deciding the winner through raucous laughter at the best insults. Asking them to stop was completely ignored and sometimes met with verbal aggression. This was made harder still by the fact that most of the words they used, though recognizably English, were not used in a way that I could make any sense of. Homework or classwork, forget it. Did not happen. They allowed me to interrupt their socializing from time to time for a bit of reading or a short discussion, but nothing I could recognize as school. And of course, there was fighting, cussing, and open discussions of drug usage and sex. I was in hell, and I needed to get out. Much of this hell was my own making, but I wouldn't realize that for a while yet. I remember well the feeling of utter despair that would overtake me most evenings after school. On one occasion, I remember laying down on the floor in front of the couch and staying there for close to an hour, drowning in my own hopelessness. I was never going to get out of this. All the people I turned to for counsel advised me to stay. Stick it out. Just make it to the end of the year. I hated all of them for that. I tried to introduce the novella Animal Farm by George Orwell to my seniors, mainly because it was one of the few books we had classroom copies of. We're going to read this book, I told them. This was something no one had asked them to do before. Several of my students refused. Several more began to protest. I tried to justify it to them, but I had spent more goodwill than I had earned with this request. It took the assistant principal coming down to my room to restore order. And yes, we did end up reading the book, sort of. There were signs of hope, but I couldn't see them. The students were letting me teach them more than their last English teacher, and I had yet to be on the bad end of a prank or a thrown book. Some classroom routines were being established, and were even starting to get into some selections of literature from the textbooks I had found. Actually, I had to find them scattered around the school, but I found them. But emotionally, I was in trouble. I started going to therapy with a wonderful psychologist whose name I can't now remember. I also started on antidepressants, 2 journeys that would become constant companions in my life. For years, I blamed the formation of my anxiety and depression disorders on my Dream Academy experience, but the truth was far deeper than that. I had suffered from these conditions for years before. They had limited my choices, my involvement in extracurriculars, and left me with a chip on my shoulder. My peers didn't think I was cool enough. Screw them. But the dream depression was actually pretty common among teachers new to the school. One of my former coworkers, a guy that had way more juice in high school than I did, would later tell me stories of crying in the car before school started, talking to his wife on his cell phone about how he couldn't do this anymore. The only teachers at Dream were either fresh out of the oven or people trying to give back in their later years. Rarely did the give backers last long. They could not acclimate to the culture. I looked for jobs that required an English degree that I could switch to, but no luck. They were there, but just not where I was looking. I lacked the self-confidence to look outside of a very small window of job opportunities in the writing, editing domain. And my then wife made it clear to me that if I left Dream without a better job, that it would be the end of our marriage. So I stuck it out, not because of my character, determination, or sense that a breakthrough was coming, but because I felt I had no other choice. But a breakthrough was coming, and it came in the most unexpected form. Miss Sharonda Wilder Weeks, otherwise known as Mama Wilder. To the students who knew her, she was Attila the Hun. To me, she was an angel of light manifested into an elder, roomy black woman that I owe my entire career to. Her brand of classroom discipline was something unlike anything I had ever seen or imagined. Unlike the classroom management strategies I was taught at Western Michigan University, she believed in an old school approach that I'm not sure to this day was 100% healthy. But she was effective, and the students loved her. She did not refrain from yelling, nor from threatening the bodily harm of my students. She would not take the high road if a student got mouthy with her. She could run her mouth faster, harder, and stronger than any of the teenagers in the building. When my lessons were interrupted, Mama Wilder brought the thunder. No Thor necessary. She could do more in her early 70s sitting at a small table next to my desk with a cup of noodles in her hand than the son of Odin with Mjolnir in his hand, I promise you. She said things that I cannot now repeat, but man, were they funny. And man, did it work. I had a classroom, but she wasn't done there. After getting to know each other and working together for a couple of months, I recall a moment that I'll never forget. It was my planned period, and we were listening to some gospel and having a chat. She often encouraged me and told me what an excellent job I was doing teaching, but then she let me on a little secret. Mr. Flowers, you have got to go and get yourself a backbone. There are special people in your lives that can say this kind of thing to you, and it doesn't feel like an insult. It feels like love. Truth that's smacking you in the face, yes, but truth nonetheless. Mama Wilder had that magic, and she used it to wake me up. I began to more intentionally walk in her footsteps and become the kind of force in my classroom that my students could not ignore. Unknowingly, I began to send my students the social signals that they were accustomed to for taking control of a classroom. I was standing up in front of my students with a newly found and slowly growing backbone. The turning point for me happened later that year. Outside of the Benton Harbor Public Library on a walking field trip to do some research, because we didn't have a library, I had a confrontation with a man that caught me off guard. We had finished with our book selections and were headed out. A man was coming in as we were exiting. "How's everybody doing?" he called out to us. As the adult of the group, I answered for the kids. "Doing fine, sir." He looked at me disgusted. "I wasn't talking to you. I was talking to these fine young black folks." I decided to disengage from the conversation and started back towards the school. My students were having none of that. A few began to mumble to themselves, "He can't talk to our teacher that way." Then they started yelling back at the man, "This is Mr. Flowers. You can't talk to him like that. We don't know you. He's our teacher." I was able to settle them down and get back to the school, but I was never the same after that. My students, the ones who disrespect me on the daily, stood up for me in public. It was at that moment that I realized that I was starting to really get in. I was their teacher. I mattered to them. Why couldn't they just say it? "Mr. Flowers, thanks for sticking with us. Mr. Flowers, I really like that story you read with us. Mr. Flowers, you're all right." Or at least just be in their seats and start their bell work without having to be yelled at? Nope, that's not how it worked. Maybe it worked that way at other schools with other children, but it didn't work that way with them. Appreciation did not come with titles or authority or a job well done. It was more personal than that. If we go through some things together, then maybe you're all right. It was a different way of seeing the world. Mama Wilder was eventually moved to another classroom, but she never left me. I learned how to use the power of personality and voice to control a classroom. I wasn't perfect by any means, or really even that great, but I was good for sure. A second turning point came when I decided that their language mattered as much as the one that I was trying to teach them. As I mentioned before, my students had a command of English that I did not. Dust, bread, whip, loud, corn, catching a flight. If you guys want to know what any of those things mean, I'll tell you later. Tab, among so many others. These were words I recognized, but I knew I had no idea what they meant when my students used them. So one day I just asked, "Let's stop what we're doing and do a vocabulary lesson, except I need you to teach me. What do you mean when you say, whatever?" The students would laugh, then decide between them whether or not to ruin a perfectly good word by telling their teacher what it meant. Eventually, I learned most of them and began to incorporate them into my interactions with students. I did something similar with music. When I felt I could, I would reference a popular rap music lyric in the lesson to get them re-engaged. The biggest change wasn't my word choice, newfound appreciation for rap music, or even the relative order of my classroom. Over the course of that horrible, horrible school year, I gradually became less afraid of my students. I was beginning to see them as kids, not black stereotypes. Did they cuss more than I did in school? Yes, but I secretly expected them to. This lessened, for the most part, when I changed my expectations of them. The talk about sexuality and drug usage changed too. I realized that they were taking advantage of the parent-free space that teenagers love so much to discuss and joke about the things that they wouldn't otherwise be allowed to. So instead of assuming the worst, I stepped up and held them to the same expectations they had at home. The final turning point came one day after I came back from being sick. I told my students that I had been in Atlanta laying down some tracks for my rap album that was dropping soon. I told them that I was living a double life as a teacher and a professional music artist. They knew I was joking, but I never went back on my lie. I was transformed from Mr. Flowers into B-Flow, the white man that lost his mind and started acting like his students. One of the proudest days of my life was when a student told me there was no way I was really white. They told me I was a black man trapped in a white man's body. I thanked them and laughed at the irony that such a statement could be made about one of the nerdiest, whitest guys I know. Talk about myself. But B-Flow was able to accomplish things that Mr. Flowers never could. One young man I recently watched graduate from MSU's graduate school read his first book in my classroom, The Autobiography of Malcolm X, a man that I find easier to relate to than Dr. King. Dream Academy would slowly change from an alternative school run by the students to an almost real school. We read novels, we wrote essays, we learned vocabulary, we did English. And I discovered something that I never would have believed to be true. I was somehow well suited to this work I never wanted to do, and I was starting to like it. Most days. I still drank heavily most weekends. One particularly painful and powerful moment I had there included an exploration of Black racial identity. We read James Weldon Johnson's Autobiography of an Ex-Colored Man, read Dr. King, Malcolm X, and explored some seminal moments in Black history, including the Brown versus Board of Education decision that included Dr. Kenneth Clark's Doll test. For those that may not know, Black children were asked to select from a series of dolls, both black and white, when asked a question. Which doll is the smart doll? Which doll is the pretty doll? Which doll is like you? Many were horrified to see that the results of segregation had led Black children into selecting the white doll as the pretty and smart ones, while identifying instead with the lesser Black doll. The testimony of Dr. Clark was cited in the Supreme Court's decision against segregation in schools. I had stumbled across the online Harvard Implicit Association test, which uses flashed images and reflex key punching to determine if a person has an implicit association between two things. In this case, the test determined whether there was an implicit racism for Blacks, for whites, or against whites. Well, I was shocked to find out that most of my students were suffering from implicit racism against African Americans. Being African Americans themselves, I was not expecting this result. But it rang true with things they said. You can't expect Black kids to act like that. And I would try to tell them we need to change the way that we talk. When someone gets an A on a test, we say, that's what you expect from a Black kid. But they would respond with, that's WPS, or white people shit. In the 65 or so years since Dr. Clark's doll test, African American students in Benton Harbor were still selecting the Black doll as the lesser doll. And similar mechanics are still at work. De jure segregation or segregation by law had ended. De facto segregation or segregation by the facts is alive and well and still affecting our children at this very moment. In my classroom management course at Western, I remember well a line I read in my textbook about racism in the teaching profession. It is not a matter of whether we are racist, but how racist are we and how do we become less so? When graduating from Western Michigan University in 2011, if you had asked me if I was racist, I would have told you no, by no means. By 2012, I knew I was, but was learning to become less so. By the end of my career there and into my career at Lake Michigan College, I had real self-knowledge. Today, well, I would still say no, but I would never stand up and claim to be an example like I might have back in 2011. Raising fists in the air with my Black brothers and sisters is too easy nowadays. All I have to do is change my Facebook or Instagram profile to include some kind of anti-racist signaling or go on a march one summer. But maintaining a real connection with the culture on the other side of the river and doing the real work of relating to people is another story altogether. It's hard, and it doesn't always end in feeling like the good guy. But it is just as, if not more important than, the other kinds of social justice work we do. My time at Dream Academy was not a success story like Dangerous Minds or Freedom Riders or the other kind of stories of white self-congratulation. I didn't change test scores or cause a mass enrollment in colleges in the area from Dream Academy High School. In fact, over the 5 years I taught there, I'm only aware of roughly that number of Dream kids who would finish a bachelor's degree. Something I would again fail to change in my job there, which I will talk about with anyone who asks. But most of our kids crashed on the rocks of Lake Michigan College. Couldn't cut it there. And then one day I heard it. The talk about the bridge. Don't cross that bridge. What bridge? Why not? They were talking about the same bridge I had grown up hearing about from my peers and some adults. Except in this case, it was the other way around. If a Black man from Benton Harbor crosses that bridge, they'll get arrested. Then the police will murder them and dump their body in the river. I was floored. There's no way that would happen, I thought. Why would they think the police would do that? The bridge mythos that separates the communities of Benton Harbor and St. Joseph goes both ways. I was encouraged to be afraid of murder at the hands of an angry Black person if I crossed the bridge. They were encouraged to fear the white police of St. Joseph. That would not happen, I told them, and took them on field trips to the other side to visit downtown St. Joe and the beach. For many of them, it was their first time. I would later connect them with pen pals at New Buffalo High School, where a fellow WMU graduate was teaching. They wrote letters back and forth to each other for most of the year. Towards the end of the year, we met up at Kiwanis Park in St. Joseph to cook out, play games, and get out of our socially defined boxes. It was one of the coolest things I did there. Reflecting now, I am saddened to admit before you all this morning that I may have given them some bad advice. In the decade or so since I stopped teaching at Dream Academy, Black body after Black body has been cut down by white police officers. The fears that I held inside me about being killed by a Black gang member? Well, I can't say that I'm familiar with the story in the news about a random middle-class white guy killed by a Black man while walking about town. I am not an example to follow. I am not the good guy in this story. I went backwards into teaching against my will when I needed the money. I stayed against my will and nearly broke from acculturation stress. The only good thing I did was open my mind, see another culture with curiosity, and slowly figure out why things were the way they were. And did my best to relate to my students and teach them skills they hadn't developed in their previous school experiences. But I was paid for it. The students who accepted me, let me in, they are the heroes of this story. Mama Wilder, the woman who saw the potential behind the fear and the racism, she is the hero of this story. She was an angel that gave me wings to fly through my classroom. It was never easy, but I found my backbone. And nearly every good thing in my life can be traced back to that backbone. Thank you, Mama Wilder. I love you.
Okay, these words are called Kindle New Sparks by Deborah Burrell. We have basked in the warmth and beauty of this flame and this community. As the Chalice flame is extinguished, let us carry its glow within. Let us kindle new sparks within these walls and beyond.
Thank you. Thank you, Joanne.